Hello, everyone. A very good morning, and thank you for joining the session. So, today we'll be focusing on how you can perfect the change enablement process using ServiceDesk Plus. In the previous two episodes, we discussed incident management and service request management and how you can build or infuse industry best practices into your IDS and workflows. So today I'm going to be a presenter, and let me introduce myself. I'm Siddharth, a product consultant with the Service Desk Plus team. So here's our agenda for today. We will start off by defining what is change enablement and its type. So we will discuss what the standard, major, and emergency changes are. Then we'll step into the question of what constitutes an efficient change enablement process. And we will answer this question by looking at Zilker, who are going to implement a major change to their ID infrastructure, and we will see how ServiceDesk Plus help them along their change journey. One is standard changes. Standard changes are your typical pre-approved changes. They don't involve a lot of risk, and they are routine upgrades to your software, routine firmware updates to your network infrastructure, or OS patches on your server, right? These changes do not cause any adverse impact to your live IT environment. On the other hand, major changes come with a lot of risk attached, and mostly they always have an impact on your IT environment. So it is very essential to have a proper workflow to handle major changes, and you can never dive headlong into a major change without proper planning, and that can give rise to a lot of unforeseen circumstances. And typically, infrastructure migration initiatives fall under the category of a major change. And emergency change is what we discussed before. So you have a sudden outage or a security vulnerability. So immediately get ahead with a change, and you almost always record it retrospectively in your change management solution. Now, what's the story about Zilker? Zilker is this rapidly growing audio streaming and media services company which failed to predict the rising demand for streaming services. So there was an uptick in the streaming traffic, and they didn't really notice it because someone dropped the ball on it. And that resulted in a tremendous amount of strain on their server infrastructure. As a result, they are now planning a major overhaul of their ID infrastructure so that they will be able to meet the current and future demand. But things don't go exactly as planned because Zilker did not really have a plan in the first place. They just used the same change process that they used to handle emergency, complex, and standard changes. This one-size-fits-all approach almost never works because, as I told you before, all these different types of changes involve different dependencies, a lot of different tasks, and they all follow different paths. So this resulted in them facing a lot of setbacks like unplanned outages, and suddenly found a resource crunch because they haven't really planned this initiative. Now, on the communications front, again, they faced a lot of resistance and dissatisfaction from their employees because they failed to communicate the change and its associated downtime. Meanwhile, the change was, kept in the change kept stuck in a change queue because they had just one change advisory board handling all the different types of changes, which led to delays in their change process. Now, at the organizational level, at the level of C-suite executives, there was very poor visibility and an inability to track the change implementation. Now, this was a direct result of Zilker not leveraging automation to speed up the change lifecycle. So predictably, the change was not performed in a systematic manner. And as I told you before, Zilker did not get into the practice of planning an initiative before actually implementing it. So this resulted in a loss of data and complete chaos as their streaming services went down. But let's just rewind a little bit. And do we have a way out of this chaos? Can we help Zilker out of this mess if they had used the right solution? Yep, you're right. They decided to implement this change using the ServiceDesk Plus framework, and this is what we have. So we would start off with the change management workflow where we would start off with the submission of the change request. And after an initial review, it proceeds into the planning phase. In the planning phase, the change is debated and the change implementation team will proceed with the rollout plan, the backout plan, and prepare a detailed implementation checklist in order to ensure that they receive approval from their change advisory board, which is the next stage. Now, the change advisory board is very specific to this major change initiative, and they deliberate on the merits of the change, evaluate whether this change is actually beneficial, and they give their go ahead. So, in this pre-deployment phase, change management acts as the gatekeeper. It ensures that the change is recorded in the system, it undergoes an elaborate planning phase, and is authorized by the change advisory board. The next step is to implement it. But why can't we just use change enablement to implement this major initiative? No, because there are a lot of moving parts involved, there are a lot of cross-functional teams involved in it. So Zilker needs to go through a project management approach. So we'll look at how project management and Service Desk Plus help them out using Gantt charts, resource management, how they were able to break down the project into milestones, and how they were able to break down these milestones into individual tasks. Now, once they've got all their resources, their implementation teams, their builds all ready, then they will proceed into releasing the build into the live environment. So this involves release management, where again, they would develop the build, test it locally, and then they would proceed into user acceptance tests and finally deploy it in a very safe manner without causing any disruption to their live IT services. Finally, the change proceeds into a post-implementation review where its outcome or its intended outcome is evaluated and a closure code is assigned to it. So this is broadly the Service Desk Plus framework, and as you can see, it ties together all these three ITSM practices of change enablement, project management, and release management. So let's go ahead and see this in action, and we will be going through it in a very step-by-step manner where we'll discuss how you can get the foundations of change enablement right, and we'll build on top of it as we progress through. I hope all of you are able to see the screen of Service Desk Plus and very specifically the setup page of Service Desk Plus. So let me quickly click on the change icon over here and open up the change list view. As you could see over here, we have a bunch of changes, and this particular change is what we have created for Zilker specifically. And immediately, I have an overview of what this change is about. I have the entire context before me on who requested this change, what type of change it is, what's the impact and priority associated with this change. And I also have a bunch of questions answering why the risk associated with this change is high. I can also see the change owner, the change manager, the scheduled start and end time, and virtually every information that would allow me to evaluate this change. Now, on the left-hand side, I also have a set of 8 stages through which this request for change would pass through. So moving on, I would call this an RFC, and this RFC is right now in the submission stage, and then it will proceed into planning, CAB evaluation, where it will be authorized, then on into implementation, the release of the build. Finally, it is reviewed and closed. We can also get a brief look at the change parameters, the ID status. What is the workflow associated with this change? Now, what is the workflow? It's simply a visual representation of the change along with indicators on how it progresses through. For right now, as you could see, it is in the requested status in the submission stage. And we are now evaluating whether this is a high priority change. And since it is, we are putting it through an approval mechanism. So how do we build such a complex change workflow on a visual canvas? We're going to find out how in just a few moments. So let me start off by walking you through the process of creating this change first. So once again, we are back in the change list view, and I'll click on new change. Immediately a very familiar template opens up. So if you would recollect, this is the structure of how your incident and service request templates look like, but with a few changes, of course. So we have the change roles over here, the stage statuses, a section on recording what are the services affected, the assets involved with this particular change, and a more detailed section that brings together all the different stakeholders associated with this change. So how do we build such a template and how do we associate it to a specific workflow? Let me take you back to the setup page, and under customization, we have change management. This is where you build the foundations of your change enablement process. So we would start off by helping Zilker to define all the types of changes handled by them. So as you could see, we have configured emergency, major, minor, and standard changes. So you can simply click on new change type, and let me say that this is for handling security changes. I'll associate a color code with the security change and define whether it's pre-approved or not. Now, what is it? As you would recollect, when we discussed standard change, we talked about how they are typically pre-authorized, right? They don't really need to go through an elaborate CAB approval process. So you can simply mark them as pre-authorized, and this would ensure that they skip the CAB evaluation stage altogether. And this saves a lot of time for both the implementation of the standard change as well as keeping your change advisory board efficient. And speaking of them, you can define your cabs over here. And a best practice is always to create cabs specific to different types of changes. As you could see, you simply clicking on the new cab option, and let's say that this cab handles or approves security changes. Now I can simply populate this group with a list of members. It is as simple as that to create a change advisory board for a specific purpose. The next step is to define the change risk. So this is available as a field in the change template so that you would have a measure of the risk associated with a change. Now, the next foundation is defining the reason for a change. And this is simply to provide justification for a change and why a particular change has actually been created in the first place. The next step is to define your closure codes. Now, closure codes denote the outcome of a change, and you can consume them when you're generating reports. So you can configure reports on the basis of completed changes or approved changes so that you're able to track your key performance indicators. And finally, last but not the least, we arrive at the most important configuration, which are stages and statuses. Now, by default, ServiceDesk Plus offers these 8 stages, and you can simply rename them if you want to so as to suit your organizational policies. And once you've done that, you can define the statuses. Now, statuses define the progress of a change within a particular phase. So in the submission stage or submission phase, as you would call it, you can define whether it has been just submitted for authorization, whether it has been accepted or rejected. So you can simply add a change status over here. Let me say the status is requested for information. And once you've done that, you can configure a notification template that sends a notification to a selected number of recipients when this particular status is reached. So status updates can be conveyed to different stakeholders using the notification template. Now I can involve my change roles over here and the organizational roles, that is my CXOs, and keep them in the loop about all the updates happening with change enablement. Now you would have a question, what are change roles? That's exactly what we're going to discuss next. Change roles are the different tiers of access levels or access permissions that would define the roles, responsibilities of individual stakeholders. For example, You could click on a new change role and say that this is a change reviewer. Now this role will be played by either all the users in the organization or can be restricted only to the service desk technicians. And I can choose to allow the change reviewer to edit the change request and approve it within the review stage alone. So this ensures that all my stakeholders will be able to view the change request, the RFC, but only some of them or only the most relevant authorities will be able to edit it and approve the request for change in a particular stage. This helps you to map your accountability and responsibility workflows within ServiceDesk Plus. Now, once we have set up all the change enablement foundations, we can step into the change template configuration. So for that, let me select templates and forms. And under that, let me select change template. So you can click on new change template and a very familiar drag and drop canvas pops up. So you can create individual sections, choose from a list of available fields, or make use of all these different fields that ServiceDesk Plus offers you. Now, once you've created a template, you can also make it dynamic using form rules. Now, we've discussed a lot about form rules in the previous two episodes, so I will not really be diving deep into it, but let me quickly walk you through these tabs. So this is the change template that we created. We can make it user-friendly and in a way that it captures all the data about the proposed change. Now we can bring in all the roles associated with this type of change, ensure that all the stakeholders are part of it right from the start. Next, we can define all the tasks associated with this change type, the form rules, and finally make this template accessible to just the right user groups. No, we didn't want everyone to have access to change templates, right? So we can restrict it to just managers in Zilker Core. Now, once we are through with the customization and configuring the template, the next step is to design the visual workflow. So this is the workflow which I showed you before. As you could see over here, this is a very complex workflow that starts off with the submission phase, a priority evaluation which checks whether an incoming change has a high priority. If yes, we push it through an approval mechanism and then on to the planning phase. We check the plans and approve it through a multiple tier model. And then we have a switch node that branches out this change into four different parts. And then we have a field update. And then there are a lot of different stages all the way up to closure. Now, this is completely customized to Zilker's risk culture. And depending on the way you operate with changes, you can have a very lean change workflow also. So let me actually create a change workflow from scratch and walk you through how this visual workflow builder is working. So right now, initially, we just have the start node, the end node, and these two stages, which is submission and close. Now, the next stage is obviously planning, but let's say that I want to evaluate it before proceeding into the planning phase. So what I'll do is I'll just add the stage, add the relevant statuses. Now I will have a change manager's approval. So I can ensure that any change that comes into ServiceDesk Plus or Zilker's IT Service Desk goes through the change manager's approval. Sorry. And I can define whether anyone can approve it or everyone can approve it, or define whether it's the first response, majority, or a percentage that will take precedence in the approval process. Secondly, I will define the change roles. So I can choose whether everyone will be a part of it or it's going to be my cab, whether it's going to be different types of cabs, a specific member in the cab. Now, all of this flexibility is necessary because organizations always have different requirements, right? But ServiceDesk Plus is flexible enough to suit your unique workflows. Now, once I'm done with that, I can customize the email notification, use the dollar symbol to populate this notification with dynamic information. So I can provide the scheduled start and end timings. I can also provide a ton of other data to make it easier for my change manager to evaluate this change. Now, I can also define an actionable message for Outlook where I can add all this data and it would look something like this in their inboxes. So what the change manager would do is just go to his or her inbox and approve it straight away from there. No, so that's all about the approval node. I'm sorry, I actually added it over here. So let me quickly reconfigure it again. Now, once I've created this node, I'm just gonna drag and drop a pathway to this node from the requested status. So remember that the input for a particular node can be a many to one model, meaning to say multiple statuses can map to this particular approval node's input, but there's always only one output from one node to another. So once it's approved, let's say that it proceeds into the planning phase. Or if the approval is denied, let's say that it is rejected in the submission stage. Now, once it proceeds into the planning, remember one of Zilker's problems was actually not having a backup plan. So is there a process to actually check whether proper planning has taken place? Yes, we can make use of the condition node. So let us say that this is a backup plan check. And I can define the condition as backup plan description is not empty. By keeping these checks and balances, we can refine our change enablement process. So immediately after planning in progress, I can draw the output from the planning in progress status to the input of this condition node. So it verifies the whether the backup plan description is empty or not. If it is only if it is not empty, would we allow the change to proceed to the next stage? If not, we can say that it is mapped to the requested for information status. So this is how we can establish change governance. Now, once we are done with the backward plan check, I'm going to add a switch node. Now, what's the difference between the switch node and the condition node? The condition node is just bidirectional, so you can just have two paths ahead for a change, while the switch node can take n number of paths depending on the field that we choose. So we're going to evaluate the risk associated with the change, and depending on whether it's critical, high, low, or medium, we will ensure that the change proceeds in 4 different paths. So I hope the screen is visible to all of you. And let me map the condition node to the switch node. Now over here, we will ensure that if a risk associated with the change is high or critical, we will ensure that the group associated to the change is the high risk changes group. So we ensure that a specialist support group is ready to handle this high risk change, and we ensure that the change request reaches them. As you can see, I've already created a field update, but you can just click on new field update and specify which is the field that you'd want to be updated. So let me select the high risk changes field update. Now what I can do is I'll simply map the critical status and the high risk status to this particular field update. Now, as you see, we have a many to one input here. Let me also add the next stage, which is the CAB evaluation phase, and add all the relevant statuses. Now, if these are high risk changes or critical risk changes, we will ensure that they reach the CAB evaluation stage. Otherwise, if the risk associated with these changes are low or medium, I'm simply going to say that they are approved. Now you can configure a single workflow to handle different types of changes, but with the right tool, you can ensure that the path through which that change traverses is always different. Now, once you're done with that, you can add the next stage, which is the implementation stage. So let me again add all the relevant statuses. Now I'm actually creating this as a sample workflow so that you can understand the function of different nodes in change enablement. Now let's say that the CAB evaluation has been performed and the change has been approved. So we would want to notify our change stakeholders before actually proceeding with the change. That is the best practice, right? To always involve change stakeholders before proceeding with the implementation. So I'll quickly click on new notification, select the recipients, which involves my change manager, the change requester, and a bunch of C-suite executives. Once again, I can use the dollar variable to bring in all the dynamic information associated with the change. This is an implementation alert. Let me click on save and select. Oh, we already have an implementation alert. Yeah. All right, let me select that. So once the change is approved, we trigger a notification, and only after that does the change proceed to the implementation status. Now, depending on the status in the implementation stage, we can map it to the appropriate closure status. As you could see over here, this is a very lean change workflow, and I hope all of you are able to understand the different elements or components associated with change enablement. Now, this workflow and with all of these different nodes ensures that you establish change governance, right? That is the foremost objective of change enablement as per the ITIL framework. Now that we've seen this, let's step back into our presentation and see how far we've arrived. So we started off with helping Zilker to define different types of changes. We then created a customizable template. We defined specific workflows, and we saw how the stages and statuses work in the change workflow. We also saw how the change is broken down into 8 custom stages. And the next step that we're going to see in ServiceDesk Plus is how to move the RFC through all of these 8 stages. So we would start off with the planning phase with detailed impact, rollout, and backward plan. So let's go ahead and do just that. Once again, we are back in the change list view. And let's go to change 636. So this is the change that we have created for Zilker. And let me showcase the workflow, which shows at which point in the change lifecycle we are. So let me also open this up as a separate tab so that we'll be able to refer to it as we progress through. Now, as you could see, I've already received a notification for approval. So let me quickly approve it. As you could see, we have already provided the approval, and it takes 5 to 10 seconds for the update to be reflected in ServiceDesk Plus. So let me quickly refresh the screen so that we're able to fast track this demonstration. And as you could see, the change has now progressed into the planning phase. In this phase, we can record all the necessary details on the impact associated with the change, whether we have a defined rollout plan, what is our backup plan in case things go south, and an implementation checklist to keep track of the change implementation. Now, once I've defined all of these plans, I can go ahead and define the release schedule. As you can see over here, the release schedule and the associated downtime during implementation can be added here. So let's say that there would be a streaming outage, and let me select the downtime type as full shutdown. So I will provide what are the services that are affected, select the configuration items that are involved in this change, define a scheduled start and the end of this particular change. So as you could see over here, this ensures that you stay on track with the planned outages. And once you've recorded these, you can also go ahead and make an announcement and send a notification. So I'll actually talk about that while we actually discuss the implementation of the change. Now, during the planning phase itself, you can define the tasks associated with this particular stage. And as we saw with request and incidents, you can define the dependency map. Now, changes do not always originate, in a very siloed fashion, but they're almost always the result of incidents or service degradations, right? Unless you plan a major change driven by business requirements. So in this case, you can associate all the incidents that resulted in this change over here for more context on the objective. Now, again, as I talked to you before, the change advisory board requires the right justification for approving a change. So these information provides them with all the context necessary to authorize a change. Now, once again, we have the approval mechanism. So since we discussed all the planning associated with this, let's say that I am satisfied with it and I will approve this. Now, immediately it is reflected over here. And let me also showcase how it appears in our change workflow. So let me quickly refresh it. As you could see over here, it has been updated and it has reached the first level of planning approval. So let me again refresh it so that, all right, we have already received the next notification. As you could see over here, the change is now with the change advisory board for evaluation. So, and I have already received an approval notification. So I'm going to say this is approved. So having all the information in a singular location helps your change advisory board to make decisions faster. And this is all about making your change enablement more agile and more responsive. And the first step is to have a single repository or single database where I can record all the information. So that's exactly what ServiceDesk Plus is doing over here. So once again, let me take you into the change workflow to see our progress. And as I was actually talking about it, it has stepped into the next phase, which is the implementation stage. Now, you might be wondering whether is it really necessary to adopt a project management approach. No, depending on the scale of this implementation, I can manage it within the RFC by creating different tasks. So I can break down the change into singular tasks and define the task dependency to govern the change implementation. But for an organization with the sheer scale and size of Zilker, it is necessary to bring all the resources and all the moving parts in one location. And that's where project management really helps you. It helps to make your change implementation more efficient and prevents any cost overrun. So how do I do that? I'll simply click on associations. And during the implementation phase, I can also track all the incidents that are created by this change. So it is a given, it's given that there are service outages during major changes, right? So if your end users are impatient and create incident tickets, you can record them over here. Now, the next step is to attach a project. So here I have a project which I've created before, and I'll simply attach it over here and have all the information associated with this project right within the RFC. So let me take you into the project management module in ServiceDesk Plus. It's going to be a quick detour, but we are going to come back into change enablement. After all of these processes are tied together. So here is the project that we associated just now. As you could see, immediately I'm able to see the associated change, and clicking on it would take me to the change that we discussed before. Now, I'm provided with a brief overview of the project. All the relevant information is carried over here, and a description on why this project originated. Let me quickly refresh my screen. Sorry for that interruption, folks. All right, so here we are. Now, once I have all the details, I can also add different members to my project. So you can bring in, members from cross-functional teams to be on the same page in this particular project. So I'll just click on Add Member, select the individuals who will be the new project members, and associate them to a project role. Now, project roles are very similar to change roles. I will showcase how project roles work, but they also allow you to restrict access to certain components of the project. Once again, fixing accountability and responsibility. Now, what are milestones? As with a large scale project, there are different phases involved in a project, right? So you can define them as milestones in your project. So, for example, in this major technology upgrade, we have data cleansing and optimization, we have purchase of additional servers involved, we have to manage different server operating systems. So, all of these milestones are recorded over here, and these individual milestones are broken into different tasks. Now, would you prefer would you prefer to actually visualize this project in a Gantt chart? Yes, that's entirely possible in ServiceDesk Plus. So as you could see in this Gantt chart, I'm able to track the entire timeline of the project, and also I'm able to view the associated milestones and the underlying tasks. Now, within these tasks, I'm also able to view what are the dependencies involved. So this single point of view ensures that I will always be able to keep tabs on the project implementation, and also I can see how much progress this project has made, and also track the completion of the individual tasks. Now, let's say that I'm not satisfied with the scheduling of these milestones or these tasks. I can simply move them around, and that will adjust the schedule time accordingly. So this makes it very easier for me to manage my resources, schedule these tasks independently, and ensure that I don't lose time in project implementation, ensure that everything is executed on time and every time. Now you'll be able to zoom out depending on the timeline that you would want to select, and also filter out the tasks from specific milestones. So all that is possible using the Gantt chart within the project management module. Now, we can also make use of the Kanban board to track the implementation. For example, here all the tasks are grouped by their respective owners, but I can also track them with their respective statuses. So I can just move them around as and when they are completed. Once again, making it very easier for me to oversee this change implementation. Now, one of Zilker's major headaches was about not managing their resources well. They were not able to allocate tasks in an efficient manner. That is remedied using resource management. So resource management in ServiceDesk Plus gives the entire picture on how the workload is distributed across your project members. As you can see over here, John is overloaded with 2 tasks, and both of them are high priority tasks. So the color indicates the priority associated with the task. And what I can do now is to simply drag and drop this to Jake. This ensures that John is now not overloaded or overutilized, and I'm able to efficiently distribute the workload associated with my change implementation. I can also view what are the tasks that are unassigned and ensure that they're also distributed to other project members. So let me quickly retrospectively show you how it works. As you could see, again, it involves simply dragging and dropping it to a particular project member. Now, apart from that, the fourth icon over here corresponds to task dependencies. And once again, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but yes, even within projects, you can define your task dependencies irrespective of how the milestones have been distributed. So this ensures that despite governing or despite overseeing a very diverse workforce, you always ensure that the tasks are performed in the right order. Now let's say that I complete my audit. I can simply add a work log to it. So let me add a work log. Let me say that this was executed and it took me 24 hours to resolve it. Now, once I've added my work log to the specific task I'm associated with, it is carried over as a timesheet within the project. So this again helps you to track the time taken by your team members in the project to complete different tasks. Now, I told you I would discuss about project role. So once again, you would find it under the same customization section. And over here, you can define the project type, project statuses, and define the project roles, which would enable you to define the scope of access levels. So as you can see over here, you can provide them with full control or enable them to just view, add, edit, or delete each of these different elements. So you can apply them to the entire project, adjust to the milestones, or restrict their view to just the tasks. This once again ensures that you take into account the responsibility and accountability hierarchy in your organization. So once again, let us step back into the change that we were discussing before. As you could see, we are right now in the implementation phase and we achieved it using a project management approach. Now, what next is that I need to move this change into the release stage. So let me say that I manually adjust the status to complete it. Let's say that implementation is complete. Now what happens is I have not utilized any automation, but rather I've manually adjusted the status of this RFC. So let's see how it's reflected in the change workflow. Again, it takes a few seconds to get updated. Now, as you could see over here, we have a dotted line that depicts the change in status from in progress to completed. So as you can see, all the other parts or the change transitions, which are highlighted completely in green, were performed by the system automatically. But this was something which I performed manually, and it is also recorded within the change workflow. So this is of great benefit when you step into your IT audits, right? Now, IT audits can be a nightmare if you don't have the right data, but with ServiceDesk Plus, every single step is recorded or within your workflow so that you'll be able to sail through your year-end audits. Now, as you could see over here, we are right now awaiting approval before the release takes place. So let me actually approve it. After the implementation phase, what's next is that we need to trigger a notification to all of our stakeholders, informing them that the release is about to take place, and then it proceeds into the release stage. So let me quickly reload this window. All right, so you could see the notification has been triggered automatically. So you need not fret about sending an email to stakeholders, but rather the system takes care, or rather ServiceDesk Plus takes care of it using these automations. So right now we are in the release phase, and as you could see, I've already associated the scheduled start and end times. Now I can actually govern this release once again within this window itself, record the issues associated with it over here. I can also record the different downtimes which I expect will happen when the build is actually released into the live environment. But what I can do to manage this very sensitive release is that I can actually create a new release right from within the change template. And I can choose to carry over all the information from this RFC and adopt release management to implement this change. So as you could see over here, this is a release form that has been created, and you would see that it is very similar to how the change template looked like. So once again, we can associate the release template to a particular release workflow, have all of these fields pre-configured involving the right release stakeholders, have a dedicated section to add the development head, the QA manager, and the owner of the user acceptance test. So let me quickly add them and click on save. As you could see, immediately a release has been created, and let me take you into that release. As you could see, we have created a release from within the change, and all of that information that we had in our RFC is carried over here, making it easier for the release team to have context on what they are trying to achieve. Now, this is once again part of how we unify all these ITSM practices on a single console. So let me quickly refresh it. As you could see, it has also carried over all the plans associated with the change, making it, again, very easy to have all the information in one place. So we had projects, we had changes, releases, and all of them are associated to one another, ensuring that all these cross-functional teams are always on the same page, which is very essential for these large-scale transformation initiatives. So let me actually take you into a release that has already been completed. That's simply because release management and change management in ServiceDesk Plus are pretty similar. As you could see, we had the submission stage initially, and then once we are done with submitting this release, it proceeds into the planning phase where we have all the plans recorded in one place. We define the downtime, which is actually carried over from the change. The next step is to start with the development process. And I can record a description of how it's going to be performed and attach any of the relevant files over here within the release. Once again, you can choose to implement the development process using tasks, or you can associate projects to it. Now, once the development of the build is complete, it proceeds into testing the build in the local environment. So you can define the different test cases that you've come up with and identify any issues and record them over here. Now, once you're done with testing it in a local setup, the next logical phase is, of course, to start with user acceptance testing. Once again, define your test plans and add any issues that you found within the release. Now, as you could see over here, once you're done with all of the intensive testing stages, you can proceed to deploy this release in a very safe manner so that it does not cause any major disruption during your build update. So that is why we have chosen to adopt release management. Once again, you can identify any issues found over here, define the downtime, and again, govern deployment using tasks, or as I said to you before, there's always the project management route. Finally, we will review the release and determine whether it was a success or not, and even schedule the date of the next review. Finally, depending on the outcome of the review process, we will assign a closure code. Now, as I said to you before, closure codes can be consumed in your reporting module and your dashboards to identify your change KPIs. So that's all about release management. And let us go back to our presentation to see how we've helped Zilker. So we started off by creating impact rollouts and backward plans in our change process. Then we stepped in to communicate downtime effectively through announcements and notifications. We automated the change approval through a workflow and saw how project and release management is closely tied to change enablement in ServiceDesk Plus. Now, the next step is to carry out a post-implementation review and analyze the change metrics to perform continuous service improvement. Once again, let me take you back into the product and let us step back into our change. As you can see, we are now in the release stage, and let me say that the release was completed and it was a success. Now let me wait for a few seconds as the workflow updates this RFC. Now, while you are, of course, moving through with your deployment, you can make an announcement from within the RFC itself. So as you could see, the description is carried over. I can define whether it is going to be a service downtime announcement, select the priority on it. I'm sorry. Yeah. Select what are the services that are involved, email individual users, and choose to make this announcement visible to just technicians or whether it will be visible to my entire organization or just those subset of users who will be affected. In this case, it is the managers group. So this ensures that I can perform all the different activities that a change enablement would entail from within a single pane of glass. So let me again quickly refresh the screen. As you could see, right now the approval has been activated. So we have a post-approval node where we involve one of our stakeholders to evaluate the release process. So let me quickly prove it. And the next step is to perform a review of the change. So this is where we once again step into the post-deployment task. And if you would remember the ServiceDesk Plus framework, which I showed you, we had the pre-deployment tasks within the change. Then we stepped into project management for implementation, release management for deploying the build, and finally, we are once again back into change enablement. Right now, it has moved into the post-implementation review. So I can say that the next review is on a later date and click on save. Now, typically for major changes, you would be performing a post-implementation review. But for emergency changes, you would actually proceed with the implementation first and retrospectively record it within the ServiceDesk Plus ITSM solution. Now, once again, we have an approval node, and you would be wondering why we have so many checks and balances. As I told you before, it is entirely up to you to define what is your risk appetite, right? And now, as you could see, we have completed it. The workflow icon indicates that this change has been completed, and I can define the closure code as that. It was completed. It was a successful change. Now we have ensured that Zilker was able to safely roll out this major change, and we helped them to leverage the synergy between change, release, and project management in ServiceDesk Plus. Now, is it all over with helping Zilker? No, we have to ensure that they perform continual service improvement. You would know that it is one of the critical components of the ITIL framework, and using these graphical dashboards, we can identify all the updates or all the KPIs that are essential for tracking change enablement. As you could see, we have the open changes defined by their approval status. We can have changes defined by their types, and we can even drill down into these metrics by clicking on them. And immediately I have an overview of all the changes that are awaiting approval. So you can simply click on the gear icon over here to ensure that these graphical dashboards are refreshed in specific time intervals. And you can also go ahead and edit this dashboard so that you add different KPIs uh, to your technician's dashboard view. So as you could see over here, we have all of these widgets within right within this tab, and we can track all of them within your ServiceDesk Plus console. It's not just restricted to graphical dashboards, but rather you can create or can make use of 200 plus gained reports that we have. So let me quickly show you one of these reports. As you could see, you can simply use one of these out of the box reports. You can even export them into different file formats, schedule them for regular intervals, and even mail them to specific stakeholders. So this ensures that your C-suite executives are always kept in the loop about all the KPIs and how continual service improvement is being performed. But again, you might have some unique requirements, unique metrics, so you can go ahead and click on New Custom Report and generate any of these four types of reports for a specific module. So let me quickly select changes, call it a success rate report, and proceed to the report wizard. Now I can select the columns that are required to be displayed. As you could see, I have all of the information associated with the change. All of those fields are present. So I can add them over here, filter them out, and create my own custom report. So that's all about change enablement. So as you could see, Zilker were facing a lot of struggles in the absence of a structured approach to change enablement. And we were able to help them out using all of these steps that I've walked you through. So let me quickly recap what we discussed in the session. I realize it's been a pretty long session, but thank you for staying with me throughout. And let me quickly again summarize the discussion or the core of this particular webinar. So we started off by defining the different change types. We were able to see how Zilka created different change templates, associated them to workflows, and how they consume the stages and statuses for each of these types of changes. Secondly, we saw how you can configure the change advisory board. We saw how you can implement a major change using project and release management. We also saw how stakeholders are kept informed through automated notifications. And we captured all the change related communication under the change communications tab. Finally, we performed a post-implementation review and ensured that we had a successful change. Now, thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot for all the patience with which you were participating throughout this masterclass episode. Hope you liked it. And to know more about ServiceDesk Plus, you can browse through our admin guide, take a look at our release notes, have a look at some of our great product videos where we showcase quick implementation tips. And the community is always a great place to interact with your peers. And if you have any questions for us or feedback, please, uh, you know, uh, contact us through the support portal or write to us at hello@servicedeskplus.com. So thank you, folks. In the next episode, we will be back with IT asset management and Service Desk Plus. So until then, it's goodbye from Siddharth. Have a great day.